So James Woods came out recently because there was somebody on Twitter asked him, they said, look, I respect you as an actor. Like, how evil do you think Hollywood actually is? He goes, however evil, it says, multiply your worst fears by 100. So he's basically saying that Hollywood is as evil as you can imagine, and then worse.
I mean, I'm going to take what might be an unpopular stance here and say that there is no such thing as a positive, as in it is. God, how do I put this? There is no such thing, in my opinion, as just evil. Evil, in my opinion, is the absence of good. Okay. I think that we all sort of are born with an innate sense of right and wrong, and that as we age, as we mature, we can be trained to ignore that sense of right and wrong. But I do believe that there is an objective morality to the universe, and that we are all born with an awareness of it as humans. But society, culture, events, trauma, things like that can lead you astray from it. And therefore, what you have is somebody who is purely evil is somebody who is in no way good. Yeah. I think that you can be varying amounts of good, but to be evil is to lack goodness, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think that then what Hollywood does in a lot of respects is they take people who may just be average people and teach them to ignore?
Yeah.
That's the number one thing?
I think that's the thing is because look at so many of these people who, go into Hollywood and they're America's darling or something like that. They come from a small town.
That happens in college too.
Yeah, exactly.
They go to college and they come out looking absolutely miserable.
You have somebody who goes somewhere, they leave home, they're surrounded by other people with another way of life. It's an entirely different culture in Hollywood, just like it's an entirely different culture when you go to college. So to me, what you're seeing is it's not necessarily that somebody is born and they're more bad than they are good.
Yeah.
It's that just as darkness is the absence of light, evil is the absence of good, and you can train somebody to prefer the darkness. It's not necessarily that they were born to appreciate it. It's that you have made them uncomfortable with the light.
And then they come to accept it as the new normal for them, right?
Yeah, and they don't even realize that they're doing the wrong thing.
It's like when a lot of people will talk about, I believe it was Michelle Trachtenberg would talk about, I could be misremembering. I don't want to quote that just in case I'm wrong about that one. Basically saying like, look, I assumed that your boss yelled at you all the time. Like a lot of young actors who are just, we don't live in a world where kids go to work for adults at a young age, right? Like Hollywood is a unique example where children then go and spend full work days with adults who are in high pressure situations because they're put in charge of these massive projects that cost lots of money. So they feel extremely obliged to turn this thing into something profitable, something to work. So they're on edge. Everyone else is on edge. You're doing something creative in general, which when you mix multiple people into creative endeavors, people butt heads automatically. And then you wonder where people start to just realize that people can be awful to one another, and it becomes part of their everyday process. And they don't realize that isn't necessarily always the norm, right?
Yep.
And then that gets on top of the fact that you have self-serving producers, you have self-serving directors, you have the history of Hollywood with things like casting couches and all the evil that comes from an industry that has taught you to ignore what is moral, ignore what is right, for the sake of modernity, for the sake of this is what our current culture accepts. And they've pushed it slowly. I thought it was really interesting what you were talking about yesterday about how like God has just recently almost been stripped from modern movies and television in any context other than some caricature of a villain of some either like mega church priest who's a snake oil salesman, and that's the best, most charitable interpretation you're going to get these days, which is that he's just a charlatan. The worst case scenario, as we know, is going to be the examples of other things that have happened in the past in the church, which then they portray as the norm, and that's everything, and that's they never show you a charitable interpretation. And it's always that way now. So,
and I think there's a certain irony to it. One of the things, I did not like The Rings of Power. I'm going to come out and say that. I don't think it's an unpopular opinion. It was garbage for a number of reasons. We talked about it the other day.
I didn't like it so much I wouldn't watch it.
The only reason I watched it all the way through was so that I could criticize it properly. I didn't want to be one of those people who's like, I only watched the first episode, but I hate it. Like,
I did exactly what people that see advertisements and don't like what they see do. I didn't watch it.
I was I need to know why this is bad, because it's my job to talk about folklore, and as far as I'm concerned, The Lord of the Rings is folklore, but it doesn't get the very premise of the story Tolkien was trying to tell. It doesn't understand evil. It presents a purely evil figure. It doesn't understand the concept of free will, because Tolkien was working off of a Catholic background. He understands the concept of free will. He understands the creation and how you can fall. It's all kind of an indirect allegory.
There is value in pointing out, like I heard Peterson pointed out, Jordan Peterson pointed out, there is nothing harmless about, or there's nothing good about a harmless person.
Yeah.
Good requires the agency to not be good, which is a very religious concept in that, like, humans have free will. God gave free will, so that way you could choose to be good, because you can't be good unless you're making the choice to be good. Otherwise, if you don't have agency, if you're not allowed to do something bad, if being bad isn't on the menu, you can't decide to be good. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
exactly. And that's beautiful, beautiful, Phil.
The value's in the surrender.
Pardon me?
The value's in the surrender.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I think of it as, like, if you're a person that is constantly walking around and you are in no position to ever aggress against someone or ever harm anyone,
your peace means nothing.
Yeah, you can't be looked at, oh, isn't that a good person? Well, they can't be good because they never had the ability to harm you. It doesn't mean that they had pure thoughts. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't have harmed you.
That's why you
if
never
they were
trust a
given
male
the,
feminist.
Amen,
yeah.
brother.
It doesn't, if they you can't say, oh, they're good unless they actually have the ability and opportunity to harm you and then make the active choice. No, I'm not going to. Particularly if you're a person that could really harm someone. If you're in a position where, like, so your family is good when your family does not hurt you. There's no one that can do more damage to you than your, like, if you're a child, than your parent. So if your parent is a good parent, that means they're doing good things for you and not smashing your face against the wall because you spilled juice on the floor or whatever. So I think there's value in that. I think that people need to internalize that and think about that. Being good is a choice, right? It's not the inability to be evil.
And I don't think it gets better, personally. I think that the only way this changes is if we get a fundamental shift away from Hollywood. Look, I'm still going to watch the movies. I'm not going to, in a lot of ways, whether it's because we do it for work here, is the fact that there are lots of old movies and television shows that I love that have fairly decent messaging in them. But even then, like, I'm not watching television and movies to be shown overt messages in most cases, right? That doesn't interest me. So I'm going to keep watching the stuff that I like. But I think if the goal here for most of the people, and I think a lot of the people who are watching this show or operate in this sphere would say we need to come up with an alternative, then the idea is to move away from these corporations, which is, unfortunately, that evil is embedded so deeply into that world through financing, through relationships with producers.
Financing is such a
just, if you look at this, if you've ever been to an actual movie studio on these lots, the amount of infrastructure that has been built around this industry, it really is, if you believe that Hollywood is now evil, that they're portraying evil messaging, there is an insane amount of money, infrastructure, and human work that's been put into evil.
I do think, however, that the human drive to create is more powerful than that. And I think that just because we have established an industry that has itself become extraordinarily corrupt and, I mean, frankly, demonic in many cases, but just because we've created that does not mean that that is the end, that we have to just accept that Hollywood is Hollywood and there's nothing we can do because we don't have the money. I think that people underestimate the extent to which people who want to create something will go to whatever lengths possible to make sure it happens. One good example of this is Wendigoon is making a movie called Stalker Shadow of the Zone. He completely crowdfunded it, 100%. And you know what? Yeah, it took the fact that he had 2 million subscribers and friends who had lots of subscribers. But by just saying, we want to do this, and having a concrete plan and going and putting it out there, he was able to crowdsource it. And I think that that's the key here, is we need to do a good job of giving people the material, saying, this is what I want to make, please help me. Instead of saying, this is what I want to make, I'm going to go pitch it to some producer's desk. If you can't get that done, go to your fans, go to your followers, ask your friends, communicate, use your network, use your community, instead of hoping that somebody else with a lot of power is going to do the right thing. We need to get out there and start supporting each other and supporting independent ventures instead of just saying, well, you know what, it's just going to fail anyway. Like, as a community, it's going to come to us to put our money where our mouth is and say, if we're sick of Hollywood, let's fund someone else. And I think Daily Wire is doing a great job. I think Timcast is doing a great job. And then you've got a whole bunch of YouTubers and YouTube channels who are getting together to help.
Doesn't Daily Wire and PragerU all have like content for kids now too?
I think so. Yeah.
Daily Wire is working on it. If they haven't released it yet, I don't know. I'm not sure, but they are definitely working on it.
That is a big one right there, because even more in danger of being influenced than us as adults is the kids who are going to have to turn to that type of entertainment, who are being put onto that type of entertainment very young, because whether it's the internet, whether it's Disney and the movies that they make, and people have objections with the themes in a lot of Disney movies these days. Yeah. It's a scary world we live in, where now the evil, as you call it, or as we call it, has built themselves into such an important part of our culture that it's becoming difficult to extricate yourself from it. And that's not a pleasant situation to be in, but in a lot of ways, like yesterday I said that it felt like it happened over time, and you're saying, no, this is a fairly recent phenomenon.
We want to think that it's been like the past 40 years has been, it's really the past 10. Yeah. Like we have been...
See, actually, what I think is, I think Hollywood has been very, very immoral for a very long time, but I don't think that they were, to me, what it is, I feel like they've become distinctly anti-American in a lot of contexts in the last couple of years.
The people there were immoral.
Yeah.
The people they were trying to sell to had a moral compass.
Yeah.
So they had to make movies that presented morality, that fit with the beliefs and the wants of the consumer.
But they don't
and
have
where
to
they
do
are
that
now
anymore.
is they can make enough money now by appealing to the base nature and, you know, that debauchery, that hedonism. They can make the money by appealing to that, so they no longer need to pretend that they have any morality whatsoever. Hollywood can be itself now. The monster can finally take off the mask.
Oh, well, also ESG financing.
Yeah.
The fact that how much it makes at the box office doesn't matter when you're doing stakeholder capitalism versus...
Yeah, the financing thing I think is a really big deal, because I think that it seems from what I can gather reading, articles and stuff like that, it seems like there are a lot of companies that really kind of went along with the ESG stuff because they felt like they had to, and there wasn't a significant pushback. So once the boycott on Target and Bud Light started to really get popular support among the right, that gave a lot of companies that were dubious about ESG and those requirements. It gave them a reason to protest, and there are companies that are moving away from that now. I don't think there are enough, and I'm hoping to see more companies follow suit and not double down. But I do think that if you can get enough companies to move away from that, from the ESG stuff, from the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the funding of these kind of things, I think that would be a very, very good thing for the country more broadly, because I do think the goal is to make the United States a less liberal place, and if possible to put an end to liberalism altogether. That's why you see people on the left calling ideas and people that were traditionally thought of as Democrats, left in the American context. You see leftists calling liberals right-wing extremists for being what would be considered a liberal person 15 years ago.
Well, and interestingly enough, I believe Vanguard's backed off of the ESG thing because it's not profitable. It doesn't make money, and Vanguard's entire purpose for existence is saving people, is preserving people's wealth and growing their wealth.
You know that the argument that they had been making, the argument that they make is this short term, you might have the ESG
contraction people,
but in the long term, we're going to offer you loans, we're going to offer you funding at a better rate. So in the long term, you'll make money, because the argument they're making is this is profitable, this will be profitable, and we're going to make sure that it is profitable.
Sounds like a threat.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely is.
Vanguard's a super interesting one, a super interesting case too. I suggest everybody who like knows of Vanguard but doesn't know the story there. Really interesting story just to understand the growth of the finance market and how like companies like BlackRock and Vanguard got started. Always important to understand that backstory before you look into what they're doing right now, because there's some very interesting stuff in there. And I'm not saying this to defend Vanguard in any way. I'm just saying, like, there's some very interesting stories back there regarding what Vanguard is and why that's important to the current situation.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.